Okay, so I'd like to invite our afternoon panelists to put their videos back on, and we'll have some questions for you. Okay, for Sean, are new cereal varieties more competitive to grass weeds? How about hybrid barley? Have you got any field experience of weed competition?
I have. I mean, there was a variety a few years ago suddenly appeared on the scene, which was Bartlett, and the claim was that Bartlett had such a vigorous growth habit it would swamp everything out. It didn't really live up to all of its expectations. Similarly with hybrid barley, in my experience, hybrid barley is very good at hiding the problem for a little bit longer than other barleys and other wheat crops, but the blackgrass is still there in the bottom of it for me. So we can manage blackgrass more easily by delaying drilling, and there is a difference between delayed drilling and late drilling. But managing it with variety, with vigorous variety, with higher seed rates, and all of those things help on all varieties of wheat. The more vigorous varieties haven't thrilled me particularly, particularly where people have assumed it is the panacea for control. Where all the other options are brought in and all of the other integrated aspects are brought in, then it's a good, valuable part of the solution. But as I said, hybrid winter barley isn't the solution. Hybrid winter barley maybe hides it for another week. It's part of a solution if everything else is brought in to help.
Obviously, we sort of asked you to talk about 2019 as being a particularly sort of challenging year. Will farmers remember the challenging weather years and what they had to do to adjust, or do they just carry on?
Well, they always remember them. It's extraordinary, really. When you get a good harvest, it's always down to the weather, and when you get a bad one, it's always down to the agronomist. So yeah, they will remember, but it very short memories. I mean, I have people this year who grow on very bad blackgrass sites and put wheat in the ground on some of those fields before the end of September. So we're now on wheat 2.0 because we've had to rip that out. We knew it would happen. It was inevitable. But there is a mentality that we've got to get crops in the ground. We were caught out last year. So yes, they will remember, but it's how many lessons are learned from remembering that, which is the key. It's not, it's a bit like Jonathan's question, is it the destination or the journey? I think remembering something and putting it into practice is very different to knee-jerking and then moaning about the fact you've just made another mistake.
Yeah. Sean, can you comment on farmers considering shifting from late-drilled autumn wheats and compensating by increasing their spring wheat area?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this, we've been watching this for a few years, and I've been involved in this for a few years. As I just said, there's a world of difference between delaying winter wheat drilling and late winter wheat drilling. We now treat the middle of October to the first week of November as more the norm on blackgrass sites, because we can then implement the stale seed beds, etc. Once we've got beyond that point, it all depends upon the variety. It all depends on the soil conditions and the structure within those fields as to whether we then switch that into a spring wheat. And I think we've drilled winter wheat. This year was a classic example. We drilled winter wheat varieties in the first week of March in the same field as true spring wheat varieties. And the yields have been almost identical. There's been very little difference. But to me, it is all about having a plan in place for an optimum drilling season, and then you change it as you go. That's the beauty of a plan. You can change a plan, but you've got to have a plan in the first place. And it's never been about calendar day. It has always been about the conditions that we're working with. And I think that's the key for me, really. It's knowing when to stop, and it's knowing when to switch into a spring crop.
Yeah. And Sarah, in your talk, you largely focused on carbon. What other greenhouse gas emissions are associated with soil cultivation?
Well, so I used carbon, I suppose, as a generic term, predominantly because I was looking at the loss of carbon dioxide from the soil and the loss of carbon dioxide from the combustion of fuel. The other sources of greenhouse gas emissions, nitrous oxide, etc., are related predominantly to the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that's used rather than specifically to the weed management. So I'd done a very small focus on where I was. So there's a much bigger picture if you're looking at a whole wheat crop.
Okay.
Trying to focus on a narrow window.
Are there any systems that are close to being carbon neutral?
For weed control,
Mm.
The short answer is probably not yet, because in order to be carbon neutral, you need to be balancing the amount of emissions that you have to the amount that you're putting back into the soil. And generally, if you're in a situation where you're managing weeds in a cultivated soil, you're going to struggle with that. But if you look at it on a holistic view across a whole farm, then you can start to look towards more opportunities. But just looking at weed control itself, I think you'll struggle because you're looking at too narrow a window, really.
Okay, thanks. And for Sarah again, how do mechanical weeding systems such as harrowing or rolling compare to herbicides in terms of carbon use?
So it all depends upon how much fuel they use. So if you've got a harrow that is going through and you need to do a pass for every bed, or you've got very intensive fuel usage, then it's likely to have a higher carbon emission associated with it than a herbicide pass. But it does all depend upon just how much fuel you need to do that mechanical weeding. So it's all about fuel. The more fuel you use, the more carbon you're releasing, really.
Yeah, okay. And Pete, have you looked at interrow cultivations once the crop's been drilled? I think you're on mute still.
Thank you. Yeah, we use Garford hose with the precision cameras. So, you know, every crop is virtually interrow hoed. And actually at the same time, we apply the top dressing nitrogens in the same process. So we're only using one pass. But it's, yeah, it's not that straightforward an operation, because you can get quite a bit, particularly with the weather conditions we get. The rows, when the ground's really, really wet, the rows actually move positions because the tractors that pass over with the sprayer or any other operation actually squeeze the beds a little bit, and then the hose don't always work because the rows are not where they should be. So again, these really wet weather periods that we get are causing complications, but they're a key part of our weed control to finish off the final part of the program.
Okay. And I've got a question here. Have you tested a whole range of application variables such as nozzles, volume rates, pressure, speed, boom height, etc.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Probably the best nozzles that we've found now with the particular speeds we operate and that particular sprayer with the radar sensor that holds the boom really low to the ground are the Defy 03s. That tends to be the most used nozzle, but occasionally I do use a 60-degree angled nozzle, a veg nozzle, which gives me a really narrow band over the top of the carrot, so it doesn't waste as much spray in the space between the 2 rows or between the 4 rows. Okay.
And you showed us your slide with the volunteer potatoes. Would growers use spot treatment for volunteer potato control?
Yes, definitely. Some growers have started going down that route. I'm not confident enough yet to be putting spot application of glyphosate in my crop, but yeah, the technology is coming along very fast, and I'm pretty sure in a few years' time. Of course, the challenge is, are we going to have these active ingredients available that would work for spot treatment? Because that could be quite frustrating for the engineering manufacturers to develop this technology, and then we haven't got the products to put through them.
Yeah. And do you think maybe laser or electrical treatment would be an option?
For spot treatment, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Sean, did you notice a shift in weed flora with changes in rotations and increased spring cropping?
Yeah, we've seen massive increases this year in particular. Groundsel, I don't think I've ever seen groundsel at the levels that we've had this year, almost uncontrollable. We've also seen huge levels of volunteer oilseed rape, which, considering the adjacent fields to where the oilseed rape is 4 foot tall with a stem like a bloody tree trunk, all of that lot we lost to cabbage stem flea beetle last year. I don't quite know where they are when we need them, but they haven't taken the volunteers out. So yeah, we've seen a lot more problems. Groundsel, the weed of the year, cranesbill becoming far more difficult, poppies becoming more difficult, and you've nearly got to spray them on the perfect day to stop them. Mayweed is another one that we're struggling with a little bit, particularly up here. And black bindweed, the sulfonylureas don't touch it at all. We have to resort to, well, fluroxypyr. I mean, starane is the thing that controls our black bindweed now. So we have seen big issues, but we've also seen far more benefit, I think, to going spring crop in terms of weed control, not necessarily in terms of margin and final gross margins, but certainly in terms of weed control, it's more beneficial to us. The obvious problem is where we're putting in things like a lot of these spring crops where we're losing active ingredients rapidly, the options for controlling those weeds within those crops become far more difficult. I mean, you start to think about bentazone on spring beans and cranesbill control, late cranesbill control, or that's something that gets through the preem. So we roll with it. It is what it is. We can only work with what we've got, and you adapt to the change, but sometimes those changes are hard to take.
Yes, do you think diversity and flexibility are sort of key?
Absolutely. I think the thing with IPM in any form, whether it be IWM, I'm not sure how helpful it is having integrated pest management, integrated weed management, integrated crop, integrated farm. It's all integrated pest. But I think the principle of IPM in any form is that there is inbuilt a problem with failure. And we know there are massive risks associated with taking a gamble that you believe there are more predators than pests when it comes to insects. There is always going to be an element of failure involved in that. So I think there should be more support for growers who want to go down an integrated route, because that needs to reflect the risk that they're taking by not using products out of a can, which might do a better job than an IPM approach.
So similar to what we asked Barney and Hannah this morning, what do you think can be done to improve the uptake of IWM strategies across the UK? Is it the support groups, etc.?
I think access to knowledge. I mean, for me as an agronomist, I like to know what predators I'm looking for pest control. I need to have reference books so I know the thresholds of predators as much as I do pests. And I think having that sort of resource there, so that there's a reliable resource with documented scientific evidence showing that this happens if you do this, that would help. I also go back on what I've said, that I think there were 230 odd respondents to the initial survey we spoke about this morning. That's not many. And I would guess that, as I said, an awful lot of people are doing integrated management protocols, but don't necessarily think that that's what IWM is. It's just a word that's been attached to something they've been doing for years. So I think an awful lot more people are doing it than know they're doing it, because I think they're doing it without realising.
Yeah, they're just not putting the label to it.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so a couple more questions for Sarah, please. Many people say min-till, but actually move the soil quite a lot. Do we have data on true non-inversion compared to min-inversion?
So what I did, I mean, you can create data by looking at the different passes that are made. So if you know how much fuel is used by each vehicle, then you can create that data. The way I did the data that I put together for the slides today was to look at different passes within the tool. So the Cool Farm tool, you can select different field operations, and I just use those as my default. I don't know that they're necessarily perfect in terms of the amount of fuel that it assumes for different passes. But that, for my assumptions, I'd used a no-till drill, so it had basically done no tillage at all, and I'd used a single pass with a disc cultivator. Now, my expectation is that some min-till sessions, you probably would do 2 or 3 passes with a set of discs, and therefore you're getting up probably towards halfway up where I was with the inversion tillage column. So the more times you go in, the more soil you move, the more fuel you're using.
Yeah, yeah. So is any account taken of carbon sequestration or inputs in your analysis, or are you only looking at emissions?
So in that particular analysis, I only looked at emissions because I was, as I said before, keeping a fairly narrow focus on what I was doing. If you're looking at carbon sequestration, certainly the types of approaches that I was looking at there, minimal sequestration is going to be happening unless you're doing, for example, minimum tillage for a period of time. So minimum tillage, if you're going to do it, you need to be doing it every year for 20 years. You can't just do it for 3 years, then plough and then do it for 3 years. The carbon benefit doesn't remain. So I've not in detail looked at the sequestration in that analysis. It is possible to do it, but I've not included it.
Okay, thanks. And you mentioned bioherbicides. There's a question, are there really any bioherbicides that could be used in broadacre crops?
Oh, now that's going beyond my scope.
I think there is at present, is there? Okay, so there's a question that's come into anyone, but I think it's probably best directed to Pete. We know some herbicides are not recommended above 10% soil organic matter. High soil organic matter causes other problems, harbouring high weed seed levels. Hydroponics work with no soil organic matter at all, so does increasing soil organic matter actually help weed control at all?
Question. Certainly on the range of soils that we grow carrots on, from, you know, black peats with very high organic matter, where weed control is the pre-emergences just do not work at all. So the higher the organic matter, the worse the pre-emergence activity. So yeah, I think that the other benefits of higher organic matter would weigh out the issues of the negative effect on weed control. I think we know that we've got to look after our soils and start increasing the organic matter, because those benefits would far outweigh any negative effect on the efficacy of a pre-emergence herbicide.
So John, there's a statement, more of a statement than a question, but surely IWM is both the waypoint and destination. IWM is still and must continue to develop.
Yeah, and actually, as I've been listening to the conversation, it's kind of what slightly unhelpful is we kind of think as IWM or not IWM, whereas actually it's a continuum. And as Sean says, we're all doing it, you know, at some level. So yeah, thinking of it as a point or a way marker is probably not that helpful. It's rather a continuum. And actually, in writing that paper, we thought quite a lot about, is ecological weed management a separate thing, or is it just a continuation of integrated weed management? So yeah, I think it's a communication question, isn't it? What do people understand by integrated weed management? And just been a bit clearer about how we articulate it.
Yeah, and probably the one that's just come in now. So thinking about getting people to embrace IPM and IWM in an increasingly litigious world, how do advisors do the right application as opposed to the application that may avoid trouble at a later date?
Well, I'll take that.
John?
I think it is a state of mind. I honestly think that IPM is more down to it's a combined mentality. I think that the advisor has to have the confidence in their own convictions and their confidence in their knowledge to, if they can't find something, no longer can you say, well, it might be in there, it's cheap to do it. I mean, this is one of the reasons we're in a mess with insecticides, because I think had insecticides been 20 quid an acre instead of 50p an acre, I don't think we would have the problems today that we've got. And I think for me, I try and practice it. If I can't find them in the field, I don't spray them. If I can't find aphids, I don't spray them. If I can find a field full of money spiders and it's one leaf wheat, I don't spray it, because I know I'm going to do more damage than good. Pollen beetle, I haven't sprayed for 20 years because I've never found threshold. And I think the implications of doing things, because there's maybe too much of a workload on some people, they have too much to think about, it's easier just to do that. And I think it is a mentality. All of my growers know that that's what I'm going to try and do. We will make mistakes, and if I make one, I'll hold my hands up to it. But I think we have to think that way now. There is more and more evidence to show us that we can work that way. There are risks involved. But as long as the grower accepts there are going to be risks, but that the benefits should hopefully outweigh those risks, as long as the initial decision was the right decision, and as long as people understand that in any situation there's only the best and the next best, there's only the right decision and the wrong decision, and so if you don't get the right one, you'll get next best anyway. So it is a mentality, it is a frame of mind, and I think the agronomy fraternity has a weight on their shoulders to try and get it as right as they can and do what's best.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're just about out of time now, so I'm just going to put my closing slides up. So just to finish off, I would like to thank you all for attending. I hope you found it a useful and informative day. There's certainly been plenty of questions coming in, so that's an indication that the audience have found it useful. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their presentations and for giving up their time to present to us today. I'd like to thank our sponsors, who they see there on the slide, so Adama, Agrochemics, BASF, Bayer, Certis, Corteva, FMC, Gowan, New Farm and Syngenta. A special thanks must go to Moira Hart of Dewpoint Marketing, who sends out all the invitations, applies for CPT points and generally keeps everything running smoothly. I'd also like to thank Julian Westaway from BCPC for setting up and running the Zoom webinar. And I'd like to thank Lynn Tatnell and Richard Hull, who have been busy helping behind the scenes with monitoring the questions and sending them through for our speakers.